Hello friends, in this video we are going to learn about GridLayout Manager. So this video creates a first example with a grid of 6 buttons. Then it creates one more example in which we create 50 buttons in a grid, and we also place a gap between a horizontal and vertical gap. This video requires creating a frame window, which we already saw in the video series. Refer this video, then come back here. GridLayout Manager is available from java.awt package. So this grid layout is useful to arrange the component in a grid. That means in a two-dimensional grid. That means you need a row and a column to form this two-dimensional grid. So in the constructor, we specify number of rows and number of columns. So if we specify 3, 2, then we are specifying 3 rows, 2 columns. That means we are accommodating 6 components inside a grid. So each component will occupy one grid location. The grids are filled from left to right fashion. So let's take a 3x3 grid, that means 3 row, 3 column. So first the grid is filled from left to right. That means the button will occupy the first row, and when we are adding the fourth button, it will come to next row's first cell. So that's what here. So when the cell in a row is filled, the grid layout manager adds the component to the next row's first cell. So when that row also get filled, then it will look for a third row and adds the component. So each grid cell matches in dimension. That means all the grid cells are unique in dimension. Suppose if you add 20 buttons in a grid, then all 20 buttons will be in the same size. That means the same width and same height. So here is our first example. If you look at the example here we are creating 6 buttons and adding it to the frame window, and frame window will be set with grid layout manager. So since this is a grid layout manager, the buttons will be added like this. Here we create 6 buttons in a 2 rows and 3 column grid. So here you can see there are 2 rows and there are 3 columns. So totally there will be a 6 cell positions here. Also you can notice that the buttons are in the same size. Alright, so once we create this in Eclipse, then we will run the example. Then we will try to change the dimension of this frame window. So once we change the dimension, you can see how the grid layout is arranging all these 6 buttons. We will see this when we are running this in Eclipse. So the code is first we will create 6 buttons. So you are already familiar with this code. We did a lot of time. Next we set the layout manager. Instead of flow layout, here we are specifying grid layout, and for the grid layout we pass 2 arguments. The first one is the row and second one is the column. So here this grid layout constructor takes row and column position. That means here grid layout is produced with 6 cells. That means 2 rows, 3 columns. The set layout method will set this grid layout to our frame window. Why? Because we are going to call this method from our frame window. Next, we make a call to our frame window's add method, and we will add all these 6 buttons. Since the manager here is GridLayout Manager, it will place all these 6 buttons in the 6 cell grid position. So the button will occupy from left to right. That means first it will fill 3 columns in the first row. Then from button 4 it will start filling the second row. Alright, now let us go to Eclipse demo. So here is our Eclipse. First we create 6 buttons. So we hold all these 6 buttons in a reference BT1 to BTN6. So importing the button from java.awt package. After this, we create our grid layout instance. Then we pass that to the set layout method of our AWT container. So our frame window is derived from frame, and frame is a container. So here we are actually making a call to set layout. That's a container method. So we can simply say that we are making call from frame windows set layout method. So now grid layout is the layout manager for this frame window. So just imported the grid layout from java.awt package. Now we can add all the buttons to our frame window. Now if I run it, you can see the 6 buttons. Now let me resize the form, and if you see, the button will get resized and all buttons are equal in size. And if you see, the gap between button is very less. It's hardly visible. Alright, now let's close this. We will go back to our presentation. So this time we will load our frame window with 50 buttons, and let us see how Grid Layout Manager of java.awt is managing it. Here we create a grid of 50 buttons, and it will look like this. You can also notice the gap between each button. So for example, let us take the buttons 24 and 25. There will be a gap between these buttons 24 and 25. So this gap is called a horizontal gap. And if you take button 24 and 34, the gap here is called a vertical gap. So we can specify horizontal and vertical gap when we are constructing the grid layout, or we can change it at any time by calling the setter method of vertical gap and horizontal gap. So in this example, we are going to see how to use the setter method. But actually you can create a grid layout manager with a number of rows and number of columns, then vertical gap and horizontal gap. So during the construction time itself, you can specify these gaps. Alright, let us look at the code snippet. So here, if you see, we create a grid layout with 5 rows, 10 column. That means 5 into 10, 50 button it can hold. Then we are storing that in a reference grid layout, GRD layout. Then we are making call to set layout method of our AWT frame window, and we pass this grid layout instance to that set layout method. After this, we are making use of set horizontal gap and set V gap. So set H gap will set the horizontal gap. Here we are passing 6. That means the gap we want is a 6 pixel. And vertical gap we are setting 10. That means we want a 10 pixel vertical gap between the buttons. So the buttons will be arranged in a grid of 5 rows, 10 column fashion. Now, since there are 50 buttons here, we create a for loop, and then we add the control at a runtime. So first, inside the loop, we make use of the loop counter I, and we are making use of toString method of the wrapper class integer. So that will generate a string. So when we are constructing the button, we are passing this btn caption. That means the whatever the loop counter is giving, that will be our button caption. So button will be created from 1 to 50. Then inside the loop itself, we are making call to our frame windows add method. That means the button in each iteration, one button will get added. The loop runs for 50 times, so 50 buttons will get added. So when the grid layout manager receives this button one by one, it stacks the button from left to right. So once the first row, which is a 10 row, that cell is filled, that row of cells is filled, it moves to the next row. Likewise, it goes till the 5th row and fills all the 50 buttons. Now let us go to Eclipse demo. Okay, for this example, we need to remove these code snippets. We still keep our frame window, so that one is coming from our base video 01. Here first we create our grid layout manager with 5 rows 10 column. Then using the set layout method of the AWT frame, we are setting our grid layout manager. So now the frame windows set layout will hand over the control positioning to our grid layout. After that, we set horizontal gap of 6 and vertical gap of 10. So next, here we form a for loop. Inside the for loop, we make use of our counter, and we make a call to toString method of java.lang.integer. So it's a wrapper class. It generates a string. So we use that caption to form a button with a caption. That caption will be 1 to 50 since we are running in a loop. So the button is created dynamically. Then using the add method, we are adding that to our frame window. So now our frame window will add 50 button. Since frame window is already set with the grid layout manager, each incoming button is managed by our grid layout. So it will place these buttons in a grid which is already formed, and the grid is 5 row and 10 columns. Alright, now we will run this. First we will save and we will run it, and you can see this is our button grid, and this one is the horizontal gap and this one is the vertical gap. If you look at here, the horizontal gap is 6 pixel. Horizontal gap is 6 pixel and vertical gap is 10 pixel. So you can visualize it. So this is this gap is higher than this one. So this is 6 pixel gap, and this one is a 10 pixel gap. more thing. So if I resize, you can see the button will automatically resized. And you can still see the gap. Since the button is big, it looks like the gaps are equal, but it's not actually true. So this is 6 and this will be 10 still. All right. Now I hope you got an idea of what is a grid layout. That's all here in this video. Thank you for watching. Bye. So if you like the channel, please subscribe it.